One of the biggest misconceptions is that Ray was the lone leader, and by being the founder and CEO, he could just edict the transformation and it would happen. But that's just not how you change $1 billion organization. We were expecting a little recycling and let's do this new marketing campaign. But what Ray laid out was potentially a complete transformation of the entire existing economy of the world.
It was turning everything upside down. So you literally had people staring at each other saying, what the hell's he talking about?
And I suddenly realized I had an opportunity to start to put things right.
Status quo is a hard thing to overcome.
Our stock dropped. My biggest shareholder sold. This is the mind shift that I had to take. You're going to engage your workforce so they're going to innovate and do things that we never even thought about doing. And you're going to inspire a culture that really wants to do this.
We were starting to have numbers like reduce waste to landfill 91%, reduce greenhouse gas emissions 96%. And we said to our management team, here's the roadmap to deliver on Ray's vision. But if we were worried about what the state of the planet was in 1994, how do we feel right now? We want you to consider what's next.
You've got to do crappy things to make money sometimes. That's what Ray was also challenging.
That's a much cooler way to introduce us. After having been at this for 25 years and one of the first companies who pioneered sustainability, you get amazing people who come to you and say, we want to make a film on your company and would you guys like to participate in that? So this is actually a collaborative effort that we've had ongoing with a couple of filmmakers who are telling the story of our 25-year journey and kind of where we're going next from the perspective of people who lived it. So we're trying to make sustainable business interesting. And I think that's a much cooler way with the music and the interviews than maybe my slides. First of all, thank you to the university for having me back. I can't believe it's been 5 years since I was here. Let me just move this so I can see you. Because I think a lot has changed in the last 5 years. In business, in sustainable business. I mean, we've definitely started to see this shift in mindset from companies adopting sustainability from the perspective of just lessening their impact and that no longer being enough. And companies are increasingly being pushed to shift from a do no harm mindset to a positive business mindset. You know, run your business in a way that not just doesn't waste or pollute, but actually solves the world's challenges, actually creates positive communities. And I think businesses are increasingly being pressured to do that. Another shift that we're seeing is, you know, a really aggressive focus now on regenerative business models and supply chains. Companies are increasingly being asked and expected to engage their broader value chain. 25 years ago, it was okay if we were focused on the garbage coming out of our factories. Now I'm responsible for figuring out what my customers are throwing away, what my upstream suppliers are doing, and we're increasingly being held accountable for that. That's a huge shift and a really positive one. A third one is that we're increasingly seeing employees and customers demanding more aggressive action from companies. And you're certainly seeing this play out on carbon and climate, right? If anyone is living under a rock and doesn't understand that it's no longer enough as a company to just set carbon reduction targets, you kind of haven't seen the pressure that's being put on companies globally, internationally, what's happened during Climate Week in New York over the last couple of weeks. And I think we're seeing like this multi-stakeholder business model idea really accelerates. So this idea that we don't just run businesses for investors and investor benefit, but we run them for the benefits of employees, customers, investors, and broader communities, whether you call that environment, whether you talk about social justice, those models are taking hold. So the acceleration of B Corps, for example, 6,000 strong, some really large global multinationals becoming certified benefit corporations, and a big part of that is acknowledging that they're going to manage their business in a way that isn't just about making the most money for investors. So that's all happened in 5 years since you've started this conversation, and it's really exciting. And I think the journey that we've been on is really emblematic of that. So if you didn't get it from the video, we're a $1 billion company that makes flooring products. Not the most exciting thing in the world, right? When I started out as an environmental lawyer, I did not think I would spend 15 years working for a company that tufts fibers and makes fuzzy squares. But the vision of the founder to completely transform that business with a sustainability lens was what hooked me and kept me and really keeps almost 4,000 of us motivated to try to not just change our company, but push other people in our industry and our supply chain to move forward. And 25 years ago, we did it by setting a really visionary goal for the business, 0 impact. We had no idea how we would get there. And we were very much thinking about a do no harm model, right? And so over the last 5 years, we've really had to adjust our thinking about what does that actually mean. And we're starting to see like a few glimmers. I mean, I'm sure you guys have all read about this, you know, the statement and the acknowledgement from the Business Roundtable that, you know, businesses in fact should not be run in a way that is just only thinking about investors, but maybe there's a broader lens. I mean, I think the first lesson for us is very much that. If you're going to transform business, you have to start from understanding what's the structure you need to have in your business to really run what we would call a multi-stakeholder model. This is what it looks like at Interface. And, you know, we actually are a publicly traded company that has a board of directors that is accountable to investors, but we're quite open about the fact that we are constantly making decisions to balance these 4 things. And you heard in the video our CEO say, you know, we went through some ups and downs when we started talking about this multi-stakeholder model. Sometimes we would say this to investors. And every once in a while, a big investor saw this, particularly 20 years ago, got really concerned about that and thought he would be making less money from us and left the company and left our stock. And that's okay, right? Because I think what we've proven over the last 25 years is our model has actually been really good for our business. It's been really good for our employees. It's been really good for our customers. And from an environmental perspective, the results speak for themselves, right? So through the collective work that we've done at the business, we've greatly reduced the impact of Interface. But we realized 4 or 5 years ago that that's obviously not enough. If you look at the state of the planet right now, if you look at where business is headed, we certainly needed much further to go. So we had gone through the realization that we needed to set a more aggressive vision. We needed to apply a positive thinking lens to our business. So what does that actually mean in terms of the vision or the goals of a business? For us, it meant from, 20 years ago, we needed to shift from the idea of not thinking about the environment at all across our factories, our materials, our products, and our supply chain, to one where we had kind of this 0 impact approach. We wanted to create factories that had no negative environmental impacts, 0 waste leaving them, 100% renewable energy, 0 water use to make the products, right? And as I showed on the slide prior, we'd gotten pretty close to that. We were in the 80s and 90s, but what we really needed to do was re-energize our culture, have a look at where we needed to go next, and challenge ourselves to say we have to go beyond do no harm to create a better model. So working across this, we're really trying to envision what would a factory look like that has positive benefits. We've got some interesting pilot projects there. What would it look like to use raw materials in a positive way? So when we talk about dispersed raw materials, that's targeting a really cool pilot project we've had ongoing for a couple of years, where we're working with communities in the Philippines and Africa to collect ghost fishing nets, which is actually the same high-performance engineered nylon that goes into making carpets, and putting them back into our supply chain so that they can go through our supplier to be made into recycled nylon that we can then put into carpet products. So this is the idea of shifting towards a positive lens. How will your business be solving the biggest challenges? But the other thing that we heard when we reached out to employees and customers and our environmental advisory board was, that's just not enough. Interface needs to front and center address one of the world's largest challenges, which is global warming. So we decided that we couldn't be a company that wasn't addressing and putting carbon reduction at the core of our business. And we were influenced heavily by the work of one of the speakers you're going to hear from this afternoon, Crystal. We seed funded a little idea with Paul Hawken called Project Drawdown. And it was this idea that we needed to shift our mindset away from thinking about just reducing the carbon in the atmosphere to looking at climate change as an opportunity, to really changing the conversation around carbon. And I think Project Drawdown has done that. I'm super excited to see what Crystal's gonna hear, because in the business community, that conversation has had a huge impact. The idea of moving businesses away from thinking that their responsibility is just about reducing carbon emissions to a much more aggressive approach. So we called it Climate Take Back, and we acknowledged that one of the first things that we needed to do was figure out how to follow the science before we set a company goal. So if you're gonna talk to any company, any university, any organization about what are we gonna do to reverse global warming, what is your strategy gonna be, the first place we have to start is science. And when we first brought this idea to our CEO and said, look, we've come close to achieving do no harm, we've adopted a positive mindset, we wanna put climate front and center in the business, we wanna declare a mission to reverse global warming. He was like, okay, Erin, I need to think on that. He's like, I'm not ready to commit the business to do that for 3 reasons. I'm not optimistic it can be solved. I don't understand the business pathway to getting there, and I'd like to know if there's any business opportunity. All really good questions, right? So we started to have a conversation with our senior team about what's the scientific pathway. And for many of us, that's not a message we've been hearing over the last 20 years. We've been hearing there's a problem, it might not be solvable, it's really big, and it's disempowered a lot of us, including businesses, including leaders, including the people who work at my company. So what we first needed to do was sort of in a very simple way figure out what's the scientific pathway. This is the most simple chart I could find from the Stockholm Resilience Center, and I've dumbed it down even more, you'll see in the following slides. But the point really is, if we're gonna kind of solve this, there's a much bigger pathway than just reduction. So this is actually based on some very serious work by the Stockholm Resilience Center and Dr. Johan Rockström, and it says 3 really simple things. We have to deeply take out the carbon emissions, whether you call that decarbonization, whether you call that getting to net zero, whether you call that all of us just focusing on our carbon footprint, that's the kind of first path of action, and it needs to come down drastically following kind of a 10-year approach, right? So that's one thing that businesses already knew. But the second part of it was really, intellectually we knew that, but we've put so much carbon up in the atmosphere, we've got to get to work at businesses on removing the excess from the atmosphere. So what are the business pathways to capture and utilize carbon in a positive way? What are the technologies? What are the innovations? How are we going to go after that, right? And in our sector, and the sector where I largely play, buildings and the built environment space, we're responsible for 25 to 30% of global carbon emissions. So it's not an insignificant thing that as a product manufacturer, we shouldn't go after. We are a big part of the problem, right? And then the third part is we've got to deeply reduce, we've got to start taking out the excess. And the third piece is we have to do all of that while protecting and enhancing the natural carbon sinks that already exist. So doing that in a way, running business in a way that actually doesn't continue to damage forests, oceans, all of that, right? So that all sounds like scientific and fantastic. How do you translate that into a business plan? What are the business actions that we need to take in the economy and business in our sector to really drive this? So this was my first step at kind of breaking it down for our leadership team to say, actually, it's really simple. If we want to do this as a business, we've got to radically decarbonize the business. We've actually been doing that for 25 years. So we've taken about 96% of the carbon intensity out of our business over the last 25 years through things like new raw materials, process efficiency, use of renewable energy, and then driving our suppliers to do those very things. Like a lot of companies who make products, the vast majority of our carbon impacts, more than 50%, are from the raw materials themselves. So first we changed our company, then we went to our suppliers and we said, you have to do exactly the same thing we've done in our business. And by the way, it's been good for us. It's boosted our bottom line. It's made our employees really connected to this mission. So we need you to drive the same sort of strategies in your business. The second thing we need to do is challenge ourselves to figure out how we can use carbon as a company that makes stuff. What does that look like? So we laid out a plan for the business that was kind of 4 simple areas. We're basically going to continue on the path of decarbonizing the business, do what we can do to continue to implement more renewable energy as we acquire other businesses. We're going to continue to implement those strategies like process efficiency and renewable energy. But also we're increasingly going to push the people in our sector and our supply chain to take on a more aggressive approach. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to love carbon. And that means we're going to embrace it and find ways to put it in our products and raw materials. And this was a really kind of provocative idea and language by design. Our CEO wanted to kind of wake up our operations and research and innovation teams to the fact that we fundamentally needed to shift our mindset in terms of how we viewed carbon, not as a problem, not as a pollutant, but as something that we might actually be able to harness and use. And then the last bit was, running the business in a way that can really protect those natural sinks. And here's a specific example of that. Lots of companies like to use offsets. So when companies, have emissions that they can't reduce, like business travel, or they try really hard to reduce, but there's just a little remaining set of carbon emissions left that they would like to neutralize by paying for projects that reduce carbon elsewhere. That's called an offset. And if we choose carbon offsets that are nature-based, if we drive sort of our approaches to offsetting carbon through certain sorts of projects that are regenerative agriculture, that protect forests and oceans, we can run our business in a way that's respectful of that third sort of sector of what science says we need to do, right? So super simple. Don't know why more companies aren't doing it. Easily, kind of science-based pathways. So it's a plan that we implemented in the business, and we got, in 2017, really focused on challenging the business to deliver results against this bullseye, which we've come to call it. So love carbon. We issued a challenge to our innovation team that said, we want you to design a prototype carpet tile that stores more CO2 than the entire life cycle of taking it and using it and bringing it back. We want to force you to do it in a year. And we're going to launch it at our next trade show. And so we did. So we really challenged them. They started looking at new raw materials. They started looking at materials that were carbon negative or that captured carbon. And through a lot of measuring and a lot of testing and a lot of innovation, we launched a prototype in 2017 that was the first carbon negative carpet tile. And what it actually did is challenged our industry to say, oh my gosh, if a carpet tile company can do this, a really sophisticated other product manufacturer can do this. Building systems can do this. Buildings can do this. Cities can do this. It had a really interesting ripple effect in the built environment to the point where we're starting to see some of those green building standards now recognize and start to award carbon negative products in the built environment. They don't exist yet. Super secret sneak peek. They might exist next summer across a full portfolio of one company's products, but that's very secret. This is sort of the pathway. So if you're a company and you want to say, I want to embrace a plan that will actually shift our business in a way that can help reverse global warming, this is at a nuts and bolts level what it actually looks like. So adopt the bold vision. Acknowledge we need to adopt more aggressive targets as a business or an organization. We set the bar at climate takeback and reversing global warming. Build a plan that's based on science. So what are a lot of companies doing now? They're adopting something called science-based targets. And what that means is they're adopting reduction targets for their business on carbon that's in line with what science says needs to happen given the global carbon budget. So there's a huge shift sort of in that direction already. Companies who were 5 or 10 years ago saying, I'm just going to reduce the carbon emissions, I know climate change is a problem, have actually sort of been asked to, and I think are increasingly being pressured to, adopt more aggressive targets that are in line with what science says. We just went a little bit further and said if science actually has a pathway, what does it mean for a business approach? Then it's about starting to innovate. You know, in the medium where you have the most impact, which is a company that makes products for us, our products, we need to change the products immediately. We need to shift them to carbon negative. We need to have an aggressive approach. It always starts with a hero product, right? It always starts with doing it once because we don't have the technology, the supply chain, or the know-how to immediately scale it across. So we did that in 2017. This year, Interface is investing heavily in new technology and machinery in every factory that we have in the world in anticipation of making a really exciting but super secret announcement next year about what all of the products we make are going to be about. And we're not stopping there. Because if we can do it and we can commercialize a backing or a product, we have a huge opportunity to drive it in the built environment space. This is a statistic that should give us all pause, not those of us who just work in the built environment or supply products to the built environment space, but the idea that given the square footage that is going to happen around the world, we are effectively building a new New York City every month for the next 40 years. That is the scale of what we can influence as a product manufacturer. Those buildings are buying flooring products. They are buying carpet. And if you look at the construction of those buildings, you realize that 50% of the carbon is in the raw materials that make them, the steel, the wood, the aluminum, the concrete. Guess where the other 50% comes from? All the stuff that you put inside. So if we can shift that as a company, if we can start being carbon negative and drive our competitors to do it, and then make all flooring products that way, and then ceiling tiles, and then drywall, we have a huge opportunity to change what this looks like and the impact that it has on global warming. So how do we do that as a tiny 4,000 person company that's based in Georgia, right? We start to fund the tools that people use to make decisions when they're putting products into those buildings. This is a really cool open source, ridiculously long named tool. I mean, this is, you can tell, no offense, because I'm at a university, but an academic named this. Like, if I had named this, it would have been like the climate change reduction tool. But this is the embodied carbon and construction calculator tool. And while its name is completely not exciting and daunting, what it actually is an open source database tool that designers and architects can use to compare raw materials and interior finishes for their carbon footprint. It is not sponsored by any companies. It is not, something that we're going to use to sell our product. It is using publicly disclosed data that companies already issue on their products and raw materials and just combining them in a way that people can actually compare it. So if we were designing a new library and we wanted to use a certain kind of cement, we could actually look at what companies are making cement that is carbon negative, what companies are making cement that has no implications or no focus on reducing carbon, and what companies are in the middle. And we can make a choice typically at no price premium for the lowest carbon option. We can build net zero buildings. We can fit out net zero interiors with a tool like this. So that's how we drive change. That's how we get people to understand the value of creating a carbon negative product, and really as a junior designer, make a difference in terms of global warming. This just kind of shows you the level of detail that the calculator gets into. And I think one of the most important things is the first pilot user is Microsoft. They are about to blow up about 18 buildings on their Redmond campus. and build about a dozen more. And Microsoft has a huge goal as a company to reduce the carbon in its business, not just its server centers, not just the electricity it uses, but in construction. So Microsoft is using this tool to say, if I build a building with wood, is that a better option than cement? How much cement can I take out? If I have to use cement, what manufacturers do I use that have the lowest carbon footprint cement? I mean, it's kind of revolutionary, even though maybe the picture doesn't show that, right? But it gets you to this place all the way down to a desktop conversation where our salespeople can talk to a customer and say, do you want to have a part? Do you want to play a part in reducing global warming, in dealing with carbon in the built environment? Let me talk to you about what it means to make a decision about buying carpet, insulation, ceiling tiles, and wallboard. And then let me give you an open source tool that will allow you to make the best choice. So that's the first thing that we're doing to take this idea of how do we take it beyond a 4,000 person company and actually start to influence the industry. This is the second. We've teamed up with Skanska, which is one of the largest construction companies in the world, Gensler, which is a large design firm, and a couple of other manufacturers to actually start driving this conversation in our industry and environment. So what that means is we host events now for interior designers, for architects, for people who are working on buildings, and we walk through models of what's the carbon footprint of a building. What are the choices you can make to actually lower it the most? How do you find the tools and the decisions? How do you get support from your bosses to make a better decision? So we're really trying to not just design the products we need, but then fill the gap between the market accepting those products and actually help people understand what we can do. And then the last bit is there's a lot of labeling that happens in the kind of commercial green building space. It started 25 years ago when the green building movement really happened and people wanted to trust what companies were saying. And companies will say a lot of things to sell you a product. And I think we see in our sector that every single person who makes carpet makes sustainable carpet. Now, the level of what they're doing and what they're actually doing, what they say they're doing and what they're actually doing can sometimes be really different. So it's driven this culture in our sector of disclosure and labeling, which has been really good for us because it's a just the facts approach to what's really happening. So the last opportunity we have is because we have this culture of labeling and disclosure and transparency in kind of the built environment space, really trying to leverage that by building carbon into those labels. So we've been working with an organization called the International Living Future Institute. These are the guys who are kind of on the cutting edge of building green buildings. They have something called the Living Building Standard, and they're very clear about the materials that go into those high-performance sustainable buildings need to be really screened and really sustainable. So we've been working with them to create a labeling system that now includes embodied carbon, so that people can pick up a product and actually look at the carbon footprint on the back of it and make a decision. And so, I think what's really exciting about 5 years to now and being able to come back and talk to you is to see the kind of shift and the pressure that's been happening on businesses, whether that's a positive business lens, whether that's an increased focus on carbon, whether it's increased expectations from employees and customers. So I wanted to share a little bit about what Interface is doing and how we've been really implementing those plans. But I want to leave with an ask, which is for all of you to now do something about what I've just said. So I didn't really tell the story of our founder because I think the video did it. But one important thing I want to stress is that 25 years ago, this guy who built $1 billion business and became a multimillionaire had never thought of the environmental vision of the company. And it wasn't until we lost a green building project in California that he thought about it. We lost a big job in California because a customer asked the company, what is your company doing for the environment? And we had no answer because we were doing nothing. We'd never thought about it. We'd built $1 billion business with a really dirty supply chain that was very exploitative, and we were doing nothing, and we were making millions of dollars. And this one customer said, that's not enough. Your product's great, it's high performing, I get it. I want to know what you guys are doing for the environment. If you're not doing anything, I don't want to do business with you. And that resonated with our founder 25 years ago, not because he was an environmentalist. He was a Republican. He used to drive a Bentley before this all started. He grew up in Georgia. He was an engineer. What resonated was, wow, we might be out of step with our customers. And when a company is out of step with our customers, that is not a good place to be. So he started a task force in the business, and they asked him to deliver an environmental vision. So that transformation of our billion-dollar business and what we've driven in the built environment space was based on one customer, right? So you guys have an incredible amount of power as customers. Write letters to companies, call CEOs. If you don't believe that the sustainability approach in your organization, in your business, at your university is enough, say something about it. Hold people accountable. Challenge companies. The second thing is buy the right stuff. Buy the right stuff. As a consumer, that's your most important leverage point. And that's exactly what was turned on interface that led to our transformation. Our customers didn't want to buy our stuff because we didn't have the right stuff. Then I think the last part of it is, what we're learning is we are increasingly being called upon to be much more politically active as a company. Over the last 6 months, our employees have reached out to our CEO on several occasions and said, if we are a company that is focused on carbon, why aren't we calling President Trump? Why aren't we writing letters to our congressman? Why aren't we doing this? And so we have been starting to do that. We hosted the Georgia delegation at our Atlanta offices a couple weeks ago and talked about this very presentation on the science of climate change. I'm pretty sure that most of them had never heard that, and they didn't seem overly enthusiastic about it. But we reminded them that we're one of the largest employers in their district and that carbon is important to us, and I think that was a positive step forward. When President Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accord, both my CEO and I called the White House. Of course, he didn't call us back, but we registered a concern. And so I think it's really important that we all think about what we can do. Science says we have 10 years to address this. So let's think about what we've heard. Let's use the power that we have. And if we can ever help advance anything that you're doing, we kind of stand by to do that. Thank you.